My name is Max Grossman, and I am the director of the Joseph and Rebecca Meyerhoff Program and Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Maryland. It's my great pleasure, among some of my responsibilities, to have the opportunity to invite people to come in and share their knowledge, research, and wisdom with us. We have a commitment in the Meyerhoff Center to reaching widely out, not only to scholars from a wide range of approaches to the study of Judaism, but also scholars with a wide range of areas of expertise. I am really, really delighted to welcome Rabbinic Sarah Wolkenfeld to our forum to speak to us today. She is the Director of Education at Sefaria, which many of you know about and some of you have probably used, a nonprofit organization working to expand Jewish learning by providing access to Jewish texts in the original languages and in translation through digital means. That's already a lot of languages mixed together. I was pleased and impressed to see that Sefaria describes their mission as serving not merely as an archive for preserving Jewish texts, but as a platform to give these texts new life. I also am extremely jealous that your title there is Chief Learning Officer. I want that. I would like to have a little plaque that says that for my desk. Rabbinic Wolkenfeld's credentials precede her. She has been involved with so many of the core communities for advanced Jewish learning that it's hard to list them all. The Drisha Institute, Midreshet Lindenbaum, Nishmat, and Beit Morashah. She's a graduate, as I said a moment ago, of the University of Pennsylvania, and she's served as Director of Education at the Center for Jewish Life, Hillel at Princeton, as part of the OU's JLIC, Jewish Learning Initiative on campus. She's been a rabbinic fellow at the David Hartman Center and has held a Wexner Fellowship as well. I think I've listed pretty much everything a person could do. I think you even had some connections to Pardes. You've lived widely in the field, but more than all of these credentials, which are truly remarkable, Rabbinic Wolkenfeld has a gift for making complicated ideas accessible, which might in fact be among the most important missions of Sefaria today. We've brought her here today to help us think about the recent history of Jewish text study and to ask how the changes wrought by Sefaria might shape the future of Jewish textuality. We look forward to your talk, and we have many, many questions for you. I now present the floor to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I am really excited for your questions, and so I'm going to try to keep the lecture part relatively brief because I would much rather answer your questions and hear about your interests, and you should feel free to put questions in the chat as we go, just as they occur to you. I can answer them as I speak or come to them at the end, but definitely don't hold back. As you said, right, weather doesn't get in the way of Zoom, and Zoom is also where we've all learned to multitask. So I'm happy to see what you have to offer. I'm assuming that everyone present has at least heard of Sefaria, and then the very gracious introduction gave a little bit of an overview. But I want to start from talking about the organizational mission and vision so that you'll understand how I came to this area of study. Sefaria's mission is to bring Torah into the digital age, to make Torah accessible to anyone with an internet connection. We define Torah both, I'd say, broadly and narrowly. So we're really looking at the Jewish textual tradition, which is maybe to some a narrow definition, but it's also broad in the sense that we're really looking at literature that developed over generations. We're looking at everything from the Bible going forward. And our vision is a world where these texts are alive and resonant. And that vision piece means that part of my role is to be in dialogue with other organizations, other institutions, other thinkers, teachers, schools, etc., so that we can be in conversation and be part of building this vision together. And so I'm especially excited that you're all here. Sefaria's question has always been, what might Torah learning look like? What might Jewish text study look like when we bring the power of cutting-edge digital technology to bear on ancient texts? And I want to engage that question in two ways today. First of all, I want to look a little bit at past Jewish media shifts, looking at them primarily through the lens of Jewish texts. So I'm not a historian, presumably some of you on this call are, and my interest is less in the history, which I've also had the opportunity to study a little bit, but more in thinking about how the Jewish sources themselves narrate these shifts. And that's important to me because I have been here in real time as the Jewish community has narrated the shift to digital. I would say it's ongoing. We're not done yet, but I've definitely been there for a chunk of it. And at the beginning of Sefaria, I used to receive a lot of what I lovingly call Sefaria hate mail, which were emails from people who, usually people who knew me, although sometimes people who didn't, and we didn't even have Sefaria email addresses yet. It was just my personal email usually. And people would email and say, I can't believe you're digitizing the Jewish canon. How could you do such a thing? Do you hate books? Don't you know that we're the people of the book? And it was really shocking to me that that was the narrative that people were constructing. To me, it was obvious. First of all, I do love books. In case you were wondering, you're all invited to my home. You can see we have many books in our house. And also, people don't generally invest deeply in digitizing and preserving Jewish texts unless they actually love those books and want them to survive for a long time. So I was interested in that narrative, and I was interested in seeing where that narrative had either echoes in the past or where the narrative had gone differently in the past. So that's one part of the conversation I'd like to have with you today. And then also to talk about the current story, so the current narrative, the current shift to digital media, and talk about how I think that Sefaria's tools that currently exist, but also some of the tools that don't yet exist, maybe we'll go there a little bit, speak directly to some of the ideals that we might have around studying these texts and how these technologies can serve us in our desire to preserve and spread and enrich our understanding of these texts. So I'm going to share a source sheet in the chat, actually. Okay, and you'll let me know if you can't see this for some reason, but I'm hoping I'm going to do that rather than share my screen because that way I'll still be able to see all of you and also see your questions. Okay, great. It's there. Wonderful. I think that it's actually built in to the very early layers of Jewish texts that, as I put it on this sheet, the medium is the message. Now, that's a more modern phrase. The Talmud did not say that. Unlike, you see all these like quotes on the internet. It says like, this came from the Talmud, and most of them really did not. So this one I'm definitely not claiming came from the Talmud. But I think that's a big part of what the Talmud ultimately has to say about the ways in which texts are transmitted. And the foundational story that I like to use, mostly because it is widely taught in Jewish circles, is a piece from the Talmud, Shabbat 31a. It's a story about the great sages Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were lives at the end of the last century BC, the beginning of the first century CE, and they were famous. They're sort of famous for disagreeing with each other and for arguing about all sorts of matters of Jewish law. In this story, it's unclear whether the argument is about Jewish law or whether it's a matter of temperament or something else. But here's the story. I'm going to tell you the first part of it, and then we'll read kind of the punchline. There's someone who's not Jewish who comes before Shammai and wants to convert to Judaism. And the Gentile says to Shammai, how many Torahs do you have? And Shammai says to him, we have two Torahs, the written Torah and the oral Torah, which is just interesting because I think that if you stopped, I was going to say a Jew on the street, probably even a rabbi on the street nowadays, and you asked, how many Torahs do you have? I'm not sure, unless they'd read the story, I'm not sure the answer would be two. Like, it's not an instinctive answer. I think my answer would probably be one, that we have. I would want to sort of emphasize the cohesiveness of the experience of Torah study. And I would say we have one Torah. It has lots of different ways of studying it, lots of different aspects. Shammai's answer is that there are two Torahs. One is written and one is oral, which is to say that what differentiates between the two kinds of Torah, the two kinds of law or teachings, is that one is delivered through writing and one is delivered through speech. The Gentile says back to him, with regard to the written Torah, I believe you, but with regard to the oral Torah, I do not believe you. Convert me on condition that you'll teach me only the written Torah. Shammai rejects this prospective convert and sends him out. So the next day, the same man comes before Hillel, who converts him and starts teaching him Torah. At this point, we have to ask what went wrong in the story. Why, right, two things. Why would the Gentile not accept the oral Torah? And why would Shammai not convert this person if they didn't accept the oral Torah? Neither of these questions is answered in this story. It does, though, point to something about a belief system that is very deeply held about the ways in which transmission of texts matters. So there's something either more authoritative or less authoritative or equally authoritative about a text, depending on how it's transmitted. And if you are doubtful about whether this applies in our own society, then I would encourage you to think about the phrase screen time, which is a phrase that didn't exist when I was a child, but is a very big feature of my children's childhood. And screen time means, in its like, I think like perfect form, right? As it originated, time spent on a screen. It doesn't distinguish between what you might be doing on the screen, just that there is screen time, and we don't talk about book time. We talk about screen time. So if you are reading a book on a screen, that is screen time. And if you are FaceTiming with a friend, that is screen time. And if you are playing video games, that is also screen time. And if you're watching old episodes of Sesame Street, that's also screen time, because all of those things happen on a screen. And so actually, I think it is still pervasive to, certainly in our culture where screens are a big concern, to talk about things in terms of the medium rather than in terms of what you're getting through that medium. And of course, there are more nuanced conversations. It's just not like our first go-to. We start from the point of this is the medium, and we have judgments about the medium. And I've done experiments with high school students, just giving them pictures of someone their age sitting on a couch with a book versus someone their age sitting on a couch with a cell phone in front of them. That person could be doing the same things. The students immediately have associations about how they would judge each of those people, what they think those people are doing, and sort of personality traits that match with those people. So Shammai has some kind of hang-ups about written versus oral Torah, and you have to accept both. And oral Torah is so fundamental, whatever exactly it means to him, but it's so fundamental that you can't convert to Judaism without accepting it. And the convert has some kind of, or the prospective convert has some kind of bias against oral Torah, maybe, right? Something that makes that medium subpar for them, that makes them resist. Hillel, of course, converts this person, and on the first day shows him the letters of the alphabet and says, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, so names the first four letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The next day, he reversed the order of the letters and told him that an aleph is a tav, and so on. The convert said to him, but yesterday you did not tell me that. Hillel said to him, you see that it is impossible to learn what is written without relying on an oral tradition. Didn't you rely on me? Therefore, you should also rely on me with regard to the matter of oral Torah and accept the interpretations that it contains, which is usually read as a kind of triumphant Hillel story. Look, he successfully taught this prospective convert what it means to trust a teacher, to take in oral Torah, the importance of oral Torah, all of that. I think it also teaches us something about the way that at least these rabbis are thinking about oral Torah as something that, let's say, maybe fills in the gaps for written Torah, as something that's transmitted from a teacher to a student. I think the fact that he says, didn't you rely on me, gives this very strong, I think, mental image that is actually true to the experience of learning through the parts of the Jewish canon that we call oral Torah. So the Talmud is considered oral Torah. We still use that term for it, even though everybody encounters it as a printed book, the same as they do the Bible or any other Jewish text. That's how you encounter it. But we still think of it as oral Torah, and it is full of people talking to other people. It's full of quotes, one person talking to another, and ideas that are transmitted across generations. And so that idea of being in conversation with someone else, a reliance on a teacher, of something passed down over the generations, it seems that something about the medium of oral Torah is a home to that idea. It's kind of embodying that ideal of what it means to study Torah. And it's that ideal that Hillel and Shammai, maybe Shammai even more than Hillel, want to preserve in this story. So I think it's just a starting point for thinking about what is it about a medium that we like or don't like. I don't think that the people who were sending me Sefaria hate mail were necessarily thinking that deeply about it. I think they had like a gut reaction to the idea of digitizing Torah, but that's maybe the best possible litmus test for how we think about a medium is like, what's your gut reaction? You see the picture of the kid reading from the phone on the couch. What's your gut reaction to that? That is a kind of test for how you think about different media. And so their gut reaction here is that if you don't accept oral Torah, that's bad. And the Talmud actually throughout preserves this kind of discourse. I called part 2 on this sheet. Those who write Jewish law are like one who burns the Torah, which is a quote from the Jerusalem Talmud in Shabbat, which again is, I'm not sitting in front of the most picturesque bookshelves in my house, but that I want to make sure everyone can understand what a crazy statement that is for somebody who was, let's say, born in the last 100 years even, and is accustomed to the idea that, as all these people who emailed me told me, Jews are the people of the book. Books are pieces of paper bound between two pieces of cardboard, and the Talmud takes up more than one bookshelf, right? It's like a multi-volume work, depending on which edition you have, would determine how many volumes. It is a large, large set of books. The idea that all of that was oral is shocking for those of us who, at this point, I will say, at least in my life, I don't even memorize phone numbers anymore. I can't remember the last time I really tried to memorize a phone number. I don't know all my children's phone numbers by heart. The idea that all of this was oral and was preserved orally is shocking for a written culture. But the opposite, the flip side, the idea that all of this would be written down, is an idea that the Talmud emphasizes again and again as being shocking to them. Whether or not this is historically true, there's really great scholarship about like how real this was, that basically scholars think that a lot probably was written down. And I would say that that is experientially true. You don't get headlines about how terrible AI is going to be until you have AI. You don't get a lot of reaction to new technologies until those new technologies exist. So I would say the fact that the Talmud spends time talking about how terrible it is to write down texts of oral law probably means there was a lot of writing down of texts of oral law. That's just my common sense approach. Again, there's really good scholarship about this also. The Talmud in Gittin is kind of for me, it's the most central text for thinking about the ways in which the Jewish community thinks about and deals with new technologies. The Talmud in Gittin is talking about the possibility of, or the impossibility of writing down the oral law. Again, this text, which is meant to be transmitted orally. The end of this is source number 2 on the source sheets. The end of that text actually says, matters that were written, you may not express them orally, and matters that were taught orally, you may not express them in writing. Which, first of all, I would say that there is a kind of marking of this as an oral text, I think, in the fact that this statement comes at the end of this text and not at the beginning. Because if we were writing an academic article together about Jewish, the history of Jewish approaches to writing down oral law, this would be like the top of the article. You'd want this to be in your introductory paragraph. This is a grounding piece of information. If you do not know this, it is hard to understand the rest of it. But if you contrast the experience of writing an article with the experience of telling a story, when you tell a story, you can be more associative and you can kind of stick in pieces of information as you go. And if the person doesn't understand, they'll just ask. And so it takes a while for the Talmud to actually get to this rule, but this rule is actually what they have in mind. And the story that they tell is that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who were rabbis early in the Talmudic period, were accustomed to read from a scroll of Agadah, a scroll of rabbinic stories, on Shabbat, which sounds like a very reasonable activity, but actually the Talmud is kind of horrified at the idea because it says, Haloni Talni Katev. This scroll was not allowed to be written down because you're not allowed to write down oral law. Rabbinic stories are part of the oral Torah. But then the Talmud does something very interesting and says, actually, it wasn't possible any other way. Just impossible to not write things down. If you, like me, are somebody who likes to write down to-do lists, whether you actually physically write them on paper with pens or you have some kind of app or like digital system, but if you're someone who likes to write things down, then this piece of the Gemara will resonate with you. There is something impossible about having all of this orally and not writing it down. That's what the Gemara says. That's what the Talmud says. And they're willing to go so far as to midrashically interpret a verse from the book of Psalms and create a kind of Jewish legal loophole. The verse in Psalms says it's time to act for the Lord because they've nullified your Torah. It's time to act for the Lord because people have acted against God's law. And the Talmud understands that to mean in a case where there is a nullification of the law, that means that you can, in a case where there is like a challenge to Torah, there's a problem going on, you can act and even go so far as to nullify Torah. In this case, that means abrogating the law that says that you're not allowed to write it down. The rabbi said it's not possible any other way. We've thought about this. We've tried learning it orally for a really long time. And actually, there's this great new technology called writing, and we'd like to give it a shot. We think it could really be a boon to the system of Jewish text study. And lo and behold, the Talmud defends that move. And that is, in fact, what happens. And source number 3, I'll just mention, I'm not going to read it, is from Maimonides' writing about the kind of process of writing down the oral Torah. And I think as a matter of historical fact, he kind of oversimplifies, but his story of Jewish media is no one had thought to write all these things down before. They were shared and taught orally. And then he says, from the days of Moses, our master, until our holy master. So from the days of Moses in the Bible until Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who is purported to have written down the entire Mishnah, the early layer of Jewish law. No one had written it down. He wrote it down, and that was great, essentially, is what he's saying. That maybe there were real concerns about what would happen if we wrote down Torah. But actually, it turns out to have been a great thing for the Jewish people, again, as evidenced by the many emails that I got. There are real pros and cons, I would say, of both oral and written text. I already mentioned memorization. Memorization is both challenging and I assume that many of you, I know some of you on the call and maybe many of you on the call are professors, are educators. There are times when we actually want our students to remember things. There are tests that I have given that rely on some amount of memorization. There is something to that skill of having things encoded in your brain. And yet there's also a reason that we write things down. There's a sense that they are better preserved if they're written down. Oral traditions, oral transmission also has the advantage of being more fluid. It's something that's more changeable. So I can change what I'm saying to you based on my facial expression, based on my pauses and just the way that I choose to convey that information has a very personal touch in a way that a book or written text, let's say, does not. That's much more set, it's much more fixed, and it doesn't have that kind of quality of being changeable. And I think very important to the Talmud is the idea that oral transmission involves relationships. It involves some kind of face-to-face contact right back then, because they weren't talking about we were not Zooming. So something taught orally was something taught person to person. And that also, I would say, is both a pro and a con. I mean, you can argue one side or the other if you want to. I'm open to comments in the chat and we can talk more soon. But I would say that there's definitely a plus to face-to-face contact and to those relationships with teachers. I value those very much in my own life, and I know my students do too. At the same time, I think that I'm pretty confident that when rabbis like Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish talked about teaching things orally to their students, I am not the kind of student that they had in mind. And so I would have been left out of that study hall experience. And so without written texts, someone like me would have had no access to those teachings. And that's the way the oral teaching works, right? You're either in or you're out. And I would say that that is something, actually sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but that's something that we hear a lot about Sefaria, is that having these texts available in this way gives access to people who couldn't or wouldn't enter spaces where Jewish books are available. But this is a first step towards democratization. Writing things down, you can then pass around written texts. And so that's a first step. Texts get written down, we survive, and we enter the manuscript phase of Jewish history. Texts were handwritten, very expensive. Interestingly, we know from other rabbinic writings that there were rabbis who, even at this stage, resisted the idea of having their ideas written down. They're not very famous widely because they didn't write their ideas down. Interestingly, we see this also, there's a parallel to digital text where there are now books, printed books that you can buy, where the authors or the publishers actually don't want them spread on the internet. They don't want them spread far and wide. And I'm like worried, like I have fear for those books, some of which are amazing books. What will happen when so many people are accessing text digitally and there's a real resistance to making these resources available digitally? Like, will it be great because they'll have like a cult following, or will they fall out of popularity because there's so much less available? So these are patterns that repeat again and again. And again, starting from this idea of oral to written, written as manuscript, and then, of course, the printing press is invented. By and large, the printing press is well received in the Jewish world. And again, that's both true historically, although there were certainly detractors, but really interesting to see what the Jews themselves, especially rabbinic scholars, were saying about their experience of the printing press. This is part 3 of the printed word, and I have a kind of teaser quote from Professor Elchanan Reiner. He's a professor at Tel Aviv University, I think, who does like cultural history of Ashkenazi Jews, and particularly the history of the book. And you can see there that there was this idea that printed books would freeze and rigidify halakha, or Jewish law, which must remain fluid. This is a downside to books. It's not a downside to books that I find most people think about today. So again, when people were contacting me because they were worried about digitizing texts, they were definitely thinking about books as the best possible technology, right? Printed books as the best possible technology for taking in Jewish texts. But every technology has affordances and limitations. And so this is one of the limitations. But as I said, there were a lot of rabbinic scholars who really leaned into the affordances. I have this quote here just because I think it's so great, from Abraham Conant, who was he wrote the colophon. He was a printer in Mantua. And so in this colophon, which is like the introduction for the kind of title page to the Torah, a halachic work printed in 1476, he has like a poem. It's kind of like an ode to the printing press almost. I mean, it's about the book, but it's also about printing more generally. And he calls printing, it's like writing with many quills without miraculous intervention, which I think is a rare window into the way that somebody newly faced with the technology experienced it. It's very similar to the way that I related at the beginning of Sefaria to the engineers who were doing the work of digitizing these texts and putting them online. If you don't know how to do something, if a technological tool is new to you and you don't know how to operate it, it's basically synonymous with magic. And that's what he's saying here, that this is really magical. And you can see that, again, echoed in a lot of rabbinic writings of the time. I gave one one small example from Rav Yaakov Emden, who died in like I think the mid 1700s, and he wrote a lot of different works. He basically put in a printing press in his basement at great personal expense because he was so excited about this, what he calls the ability to spread Torah in Israel, Harbitz Torah B'Israel. He saw that this was a great tool for democratization. So if writing down text allows you to spread those texts a little bit further, printing them, right, it's even stronger because then copies become much cheaper and a lot more people can own these books. And that, in fact, is what happened. Again, not everyone was a fan. I put in this longer quote from an article by Professor Reiner, which is somebody reacting to the print version of a book called the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the kind of like the paradigmatic canonical Jewish law code, and it had the happy fortune to be produced right around the time when print was becoming big, and so it was a book that went kind of like right to print, and some people thought that was great, like everyone who came later, but some people resisted it because there was this feeling of you're kind of shoving your opinion down my throat. It's different when I have a relationship with you and you're teaching me Torah, but if you're putting it in writing and you're printing it, you're distributing it far and wide, that kind of flattens Jewish law and makes it like a one-size-fits-all experience, which the writer who here is Chaim ben Betzalel of Friedberg, who's the brother of the Maharal of Prague, he felt that was a terrible thing. And so he has this like fun play on words. He says, a person only likes food he prepares for himself in accordance with his own appetite and taste. And so the pun is to the Shulchan Aruch, which is this law book, which literally means a set table. It's like, don't set my table, I'll set my own table. And so there is resistance to the idea of the print book, and especially for as a way of promulgating Jewish law. But it does really catch on, I would say. Again, I think that the resistance to digitization kind of reveals that. And again, we could kind of pro-con. There are real advantages to books. I already mentioned some of them. There are some disadvantages. It is much more set and rigid. It is much easier to promulgate mistakes and harder to correct them. And there is a sense of having kind of decontextualized knowledge. Once you have books widely available, it's possible to be an autodidact and learn all these things and not actually have any real meaningful interaction with the community that produced or that practices these texts. And sometimes we do see downsides to that. I'd say the Jewish community was also worried about the ways in which Christian printers could use the printing press to proselytize. So that was another kind of downside. And that gets also to the financial aspect and the power dynamic here, which is something that, again, I don't think that I thought about it a lot in terms of books. When books were the dominant medium, don't feel like it's something I heard a lot about in the early stages of my career. Is like we were concerned that publishers were dominating and controlling the information that we took in. Now, when you're talking about big tech companies, when you're talking about AI, when you're talking about digital technologies, I think we have returned to this fear, which also resonates with the idea of publishing. If you've ever tried to get a book published and it's difficult, then you know publishers are also gatekeepers, and they decide what goes out into the world and what doesn't. That's part of what was so exciting initially. We can talk about whether it still is, but what was so exciting initially about the internet was that anybody could have a blog. And so you could share your information. You didn't need to wait for someone else to decide that your material was worthy of sharing. So there's always a power dynamic and a financial dynamic when it comes to spreading information through new media. And again, maybe that's nowhere more manifest than in thinking about the digital revolution. So I want to share a few thoughts about where we are now and then open it up to your comments and questions. And I'll show a little bit from Sefaria in this regard as well. Scholars across religions have been thinking and writing now for a lot of years about what it means to digitize these texts. If you want like a mashup of of kind of like religious, secular, etc. In terms of a timeline, the Bar Ilan project, which has digitized a huge quantity of Jewish books, of traditional Jewish texts, started in the early 1990s. Accordance, which is a really important website for the Christian Bible, and different versions of the Christian Bible, also started in the early 90s, in 1994. Google Books started in the early 2000s, and one of Sefaria's co-founders came out of Google and worked on Google Books, and that was sort of what inspired him. And Sefaria was founded in 2012. And so as this has been becoming possible, people have to think about, what does it mean to take something that we've all experienced for so long as a book and make it into a digital experience? We talk a lot about how many books are on Sefaria. I'm not even sure. I don't have better language, but it's hard to say that that's the right language. It's getting increasingly hard to say that that's the right terminology to talk about how many books we have on Sefaria, because it's really how many words or how much data we have, and how powerful that is less a question of, can you read it all? I think there is some number of millions of words, at which point the answer is no, you're not going to read it all. And the question is, how powerful is it really as data? And I'll talk about that in a minute. So I have a quote from a book called Liquid Scripture, which was really interesting to me coming from this very Jewish space. He talks about how the Bible as a book, or the book, has lost its covers, that it's sort of come unbound. And that image resonated for me because we do think often of Sefaria, we being my team, we talk about ripping the binding off the books and kind of setting the information free, and what happens when you let that information go free. I've had the opportunity, because of all the kind of pushback that I've gotten, I've had the opportunity to think about, what are some of the ways that Jewish sources themselves encourage the study of texts that resonate with the affordances of digital technology. And so, for example, source number 9 is a piece from the Talmud in Tractate Ta'anit, comparing the Torah to a tree, or words of Torah to a tree, because what the Talmud learns from this comparison is that just as a small piece of wood can ignite a large piece, so too minor Torah scholars can sharpen great Torah scholars. I think this is what we would now call democratization, essentially, without them having that word. And that from the beginning was an important part of what Sefaria had in mind. The idea that multiple people would be able to both access Torah and also share Torah and share insights to Jewish texts. And I'm going to share my screen momentarily so that if you're not a frequent Sefaria user, you can see a little bit about what that looks like. This is Sefaria's homepage. In English, you can switch back and forth between the languages. And one of the things that we offer, in addition to, I'm just going to open up the book of Genesis for argument's sake. First of all, we have the text in translation, and we have multiple translations as a way of including multiple voices. And we also have sheets as one of the resources in this side panel. That's an opportunity for people to share their particular perspectives on texts, and share what they think. And so even just the idea of having one central website with all these different texts was a way of kind of bringing in different voices, and then allowing people to create materials and share those materials was another, or is another, aspect of that vision. And again, I think it is sourced to the Talmud itself. The idea that part of what can be great about the study of Jewish texts is the ability for one person's thoughts to influence another person's thoughts in a way that, again, just wasn't necessarily previously possible, or not easily possible. So that's one piece. Another favorite story of mine to talk about is from the Talmud in Chagiga. It's kind of a long story. I won't read the whole thing. The beginning, though, there was an incident involving Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka and Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma, who went to greet Rabbi Yoshua and Piki'in. 2 students, 1 teacher. the students have just spent the day studying and they go to greet their teacher. And their teacher asks them a version of what my partner and I ask our children when they come home from school, which is, what did you learn in school today? And the students give the same answer that my children always give, and maybe yours too, which is nothing. Essentially, I mean, they don't say nothing. They say, you're our teacher, and we couldn't possibly have learned anything that you didn't teach us. And he says, no, 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 there's always something new in every Beit Midrash, in every study hall, there's always something new. That's a very beautiful idea. He pressures them. They eventually spill the beans and tell him what they learned. And then at the very end of this text, Rabbi Yeshua said to them, this good pearl of wisdom was in your hands, and you tried to conceal it from me. I think that idea of siloing information is maybe a way in which book culture got kind of carried away. That once you could publish a book, so you could essentially get paid for your ideas, and then that's what people wanted to do, is get paid for their ideas. So much so that if you couldn't pay, you couldn't access those ideas. And so this is really core to the experience of Sefaria, is being able to access these texts, and as much as possible, being able to use and reuse these texts, because we believe that they belong to everybody. And maybe the best way to see this is if you look at, just go back into the text, any version of the text will have information about the copyright status and where it comes from. Well, those are just all our different translations, but you can see the different versions that we have. And as much as possible, we try to make text available with open licenses so that they can be used and reused. And there's a sense that these texts are there for everyone to use, to study from, to create new things with, going back to the previous source, and not to silo information. When Sefaria started, my first task for Sefaria was to call up educators and see if they would contribute materials to the site, either translations or source sheets. I contacted almost 100 people, and all except for one said no. And it's actually a miracle that I didn't get fired, because my boss did not really believe me when I told him that. It was almost exactly a year later, we convened a focus group of Jewish educators and leaders in New York. And there were maybe 15 people in the room. We went around the room, and one after another explained that no, they would not share the materials on Sefaria, that actually this is what they do. They get paid for it. They expect to keep getting paid for it. Again, one of our co-founders came from Google. I think it was a little hard for him to wrap his mind around. I think the scale at which a Google engineer gets paid for code is maybe not the same as the scale at which a Jewish educator gets paid for pulling together resources. And so he just could not take in that information. It took him a little while, but that was really like a very prevalent feeling. And I do feel actually that there's been a tremendous shift in that regard, because I think that people, or because I know that now there's so many resources available on Sefaria, and we did make progress with so many publishers and authors and translators. So that's been really an amazing thing. And then also, I would say the idea that the canonical Jewish texts contain multiple meanings and multiple interpretations. I brought one source for this from the Talmud and Shabbat, but that's also like a very deeply held belief, I would say, in Jewish texts. That's maybe not intuitive. Maybe you have to study Jewish texts to know that that attitude is there. But once you're inside those texts, it's really, really a very dominant idea that text can have multiple meanings. When you look at a book, that is harder to convey. And a good way to envision that problem, you could call it a real estate problem. That if you look at, let's say, a traditional printed page of the Talmud, developed by Devorah Ram in the 1800s, that has a central text, and it has text around the side, and things are very squished. You're trying to squish a lot of material onto one page because there are many different interpretations. You want to convey the idea there are multiple interpretations, but you have limited real estate to work with. Online, you don't have that limit of real estate. You have links and the ability to link kind of forever, or to just keep going with what's offered. And so that's something that Sefaria has really capitalized on as well. And so we've both put in many, many, many links to texts. Again, going back to the website one more time, every text here is linked to many, many, many other texts. This side panel experience will tell you how much commentary there is, as well as links to other genres within the Jewish canon that reference, in this case, Genesis 1:4, because that's what I happen to have clicked on. And that ability to read texts in conversations with other texts gives you interpretations over the course of generations. And in addition, as I already mentioned, we have sheets. So that's people who are currently adding their ideas, as well as web pages where we've aggregated from across the internet. I mean, websites install this software and then we link back to them. But organizations that are creating blog posts and articles and people who are putting up modern interpretations, those also can link back to these texts so that we have this ongoing conversation around the texts. And finally, I'll just mention one other piece that I think is important to this idea about multiple interpretations, and then I'll open it up to your questions. Because Sefaria takes all these texts and makes them fully digital, we're not dealing with PDFs. We are taking everything and making it into data. And because we have that data, we can also present that data in different forms that don't look like books, and they're not linear like text. And I think this is also a way of opening up space for multiple interpretations. So as one example, this visualization shows all of the connections between the Talmud and the Jewish Bible. And each one of these lines is a time where, or an instance where, the Talmud quotes from the Bible. And if you click on any one of these lines, you'll get to the text. And it gives you a picture of the ways in which these texts are interrelated that was kind of always there. We didn't invent anything. It's just a new way in to understanding and sort of comprehending what those relationships actually look like. So I think I'm going to pause there or stop there so that people can ask questions and share comments, because I'm really curious to know what your questions are and what you're thinking about.
Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful presentation with us. I'm especially grateful and delighted that you came to a university audience prepared to talk about your material in a way that is especially stimulating for students, staff, faculty, and our larger community. It looks like Adele Berlin has a question to start things off. Other folks, please raise your hand, or if you don't want to raise your hand, do put your questions in the chat. Professor Berlin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure to hear this. And I have to say that Sefaria keeps getting better and better. I use it a lot. One of the accomplishments of Sefaria is to get the JPS Bible translation online, because they had been resisting that. A lot of Christian Bible translations were there. And there's a site called Bible Gateway that has them. But the JPS, I think, is still not there, but it is finally on Sefaria. Being an antiquarian, let me mention that before there were books, there were scrolls. And when the rabbis are talking about what can and can't be written, they were not talking about books. The Jews were also late to accept books, or a codex, as it's called formally. Christians wrote their things in books with pages, while we were still using scrolls. In fact, we're still using a scroll for the Torah, for the Megillah. So I guess we had the same, problem adjusting to a new technology then. My question is about how you make references to things. And this is where we're still dependent on books. We cite pages. In the Talmud, we cite, a fixed daf and amud. And we're still using that. I mean, scrolls also had the same problem. The Jews adopted a Christian mode of citing Bible chapters and verses, because it's just very hard to quote words or a parasha or something.
Mhm.
So what do you see happening as everything gets digital? How are references to specific texts or lines going to be made?
It's a great question. I actually am hoping that you all will be the ones to answer it since you do a lot of citing of text. So thank you, Professor Berlin. And I should say for those who weren't on at the beginning that I was lucky enough to study with Professor Berlin at Penn many years ago, and I still benefit from that experience. I think the question of citations is a really interesting one and is evolving and going to continue to evolve. I will say that you mentioned scrolls. Scrolls and just the lack of scrolls and then I'd say manuscripts, or the lack of standardization of pagination historically made citations very hard. But I don't know if the people who had to cite experienced it as difficult, or if that's just our experience reading back. It's very relevant to the work that we're doing with AI and machine learning now. To give an example, if you study the Talmud will quote the Bible. And Bible, I mean, there are Christian references, but at least it's like easy to cite. Chapter 10, verse 3. When later sources, medieval sources, quote from the Talmud, and they didn't have the printed text of the Talmud, so those citations, or I don't even know if it's right to call them citations, those references are kind of all over the place. So they'll say every chapter in the Talmud has a name, which is it's a word name. Like the chapter could be called the one who marries. And so in chapter 1, the one who married, at the end of the chapter, like that's a perfectly standard quote unquote reference if you're referencing the Talmud. So, and then if you're the one studying it many years later, you got to be able to find that. That's something that AI can now do for us more and more, turn those kind of opaque references into actual citations now that we have books. So that's just to say, I think it's been a challenge for a long time, and we're finding new ways to surmount it. I do think, I know in terms of what I'm seeing, one of the almost unwitting innovations that Sefaria pushed forward is to assign line numbers to the Talmud. It's not really so innovative. When I was in yeshiva, I don't know, it was a long time ago. When I was in yeshiva in 1997, the first thing we would do when we started a new page of Talmud was to write little line numbers in Talmud every 5 lines. We would, it'd be you label line 1, line 5, right? Like that, because otherwise, how was the teacher supposed to tell you where in the page you were? It turned out that within Sefaria's system, the only way to link one text to another was to give the system a citation. And the smallest unit of Bible in standard citations is chapter verse. So you can link at the verse level. The smallest unit for Talmud citations was daf, was 1/2 of a folio. That's not so great. That's like not a great user experience. So we assigned line numbers, and now I do often see people making reference to this is, instead of, it used to be you would say this is Gittin 60A. Now people will say this is Gittin 60A 1 through 6. I do think that is a change. Like I am willing to accept the blame for that. Credit, I'm not sure. I mean, not me personally, but Sefaria. Also me personally, actually, I worked really hard on that project. I don't know. I'm like open to the argument that might not be a good thing ultimately, but I think we are going to need better systems for citations. And I think we're just beginning. And it's possible that URL is one of them, but I'm not sure yet. I think it's a really important question.
I'm delighted to open the floor to other questions. I have about 15, but I'm trying to withhold my enthusiasm. Okay, so please do put up your hand or put questions in the chat. But Professor Lappin would like to ask you a question.
So, first of all, I'm sorry to Max. I couldn't find my hand raising button in Zoom, so I wave. I actually just wanted to jump. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the incredible work that Sefaria has done. I was one of the naysayers early on, not because I didn't want digital books, but because or the digitization of books, but it was if you were working with stuff that was out of copyright, often, popular editions, right? And you've done an amazing work both in collecting and in raising the quality of the stuff. But I did want to just piggyback onto the conversation about references, that it becomes that it's significant not only in traditional study, you want to know where in Tractate Bava Batra something is, and how it relates to a biblical verse or something else. But I know in my own work that my own digital work, that actually creating correlations between chunks of stuff, unless you want to use character offsets, is really very complicated, and manuscripts vary considerably. But the Bavli at least has a standard pagination. There's more than one standard pagination of the Jerusalem Talmud, and when you look at manuscripts of these works, their subdivision into units, their spacing on the page are all over the place. So it is a real problem, and I actually think this is one of the places where computers solve a problem, right? Because you can create basically an alignment table of all these different things.
Yeah, I think I think there is a lot of potential there. Computers can align things, again, linking. I think that is true. I think also, I hope, okay, this maybe hasn't 100% happened yet, but I think it's getting better. I think there is, I think the metadata that we collect and the ways in which we can surface, this is a translation, this is a version, etc. I think actually that that is also a kind of service to, like, the kind of phenomenon you're describing. Like, we want to know where something is, we want to situate it, but we also want to situate it more broadly. So I want to know that this is the JPS translation, and I want to know what year it was published in. At the beginning of Sefaria, we put up the JPS 1917 translation, and then we put up the one from the 80s, and we would get emails saying, there's a mistake on Sefaria. There are mistakes on Sefaria, 100%, but usually those emails were like essentially saying, I disagree with that translation. And part of our, part of our mission, or part of our idea, is that we can train people to look for that information, to check themselves in that way. So that's also, I think, a part of, like, the contextual awareness that you're talking about.
I must say, from my vantage point, that I do see some of the computer and math stuff as pretty close to magic, but the idea of having more than 3 or 4 dimensions and being able to think about a given word, a given line, a given anything as being multidimensionally connected makes me very, very happy. I'm happy to call on Jay Miller, who is a longtime student at University of Maryland, and then Matt Soriano next.
Yeah, I don't have a question, just have a comment. I'm taking a course at my synagogue, online course on Mishnah, and just wanted to point out that we rely heavily on Sefaria. We use
Great.
it quite a lot.
It's really great to hear.
That feeds into a question I'll ask in a little while, but Matt, would you like to jump in? Thank you, Jay. Lovely.
Yeah, I'd love to just, along that theme of Jay's comment, I want to begin with just share with you a little anecdote. I teach Hebrew Bible here at the university, and I love using Sefaria, and I love your website, and I will hyperlink it to, on the online syllabus on our Canvas course website. And I'll tell my students, because I teach in Jewish studies, I have students who can read Hebrew. And I'll say, we're reading all these texts and translations, but I'm going to link the Bible passages to Sefaria, and you have the option of looking at Hebrew if you want to read the Hebrew. And I've had several instances, or at least a small handful of instances in the last 2 years, where I've had students say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with Sefaria. I've been using Sefaria. Maybe they used it in day school. Maybe they've used it in other college classes. So the wonderful thing about what you're doing is that it's building up, maybe not a reputation, but people are becoming more and more familiar with it. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Like Max, I have about a dozen questions. I'm going to limit it to one right now, and it's probably a simple question to answer. How do you see yourself, do you see the Sefaria as expanding at all? And the question I have is, could you potentially include, say, so-called apocryphal early Jewish literature that's now in, say, the deuterocanonical books of the Christian Old Testament? What about possibly the Pesharim from Qumran? Could that fit into Sefaria? I mean, that would be a wonderful way of, expanding students' knowledge of Jewish texts.
Yeah. So thank you for all of that. The answer is yes. Yes. I mean, we continue to expand the library. The library that you see now is changing. If you are someone who uses Sefaria regularly, or aspires to be, I recommend signing up for our text updates. I think we send them out monthly, and there is like not a week goes by that we don't add new works to Sefaria. That's just
I do get emails from you. Yes.
yeah, many emails, I'm sure. We have about again, it's hard to measure books because is a book, let's say like a volume or what we call an index, right? Is it the entire Talmud or is it one tractate? We have about 371.8 million words in the library as of December 2024. That's up from 348.6 million the previous year. So we are adding. Whether it could go in those directions, sure. I mean, the main obstacles that come our way are copyright and what I want to call, I guess, like accessibility or feasibility. So copyright is maybe a sort of obvious one, although maybe there are dimensions that are not so obvious, although actually to you all, they probably are. But I'll say anyway that the question of, if you are the first person, if you find a manuscript and you are the person who puts it out, right, puts out the version of the manuscript, so then do you own the copyright to that? Yeah, like you own the copyright to that book, and and it's questionable, right? Can we digitize that manuscript, or like access to these kinds of things is difficult. Sefaria's system on a much more mundane level, in terms of like technical challenges, or sorry, one more thing about copyright, modern texts, I guess, obviously are usually under copyright. And it's not even a question of, well, it is a question of money. It is, but I always tell people that by the time we get to the point of discussing money, that's a good sign, because most publishers that I talk to, they're just like, I don't understand. You want to do what with the book? Like, what is happening? And so even to get to the point where we're talking dollars and cents, I mean, sometimes Sefaria can afford it and sometimes we can't, but then I know we've made real progress. So that's one piece. And then there's that, which I think would be the case with the Pesharim that you mentioned, the kind of technical challenges, right? Does it exist in digital form? Can we get the digital version? And if not, what's the work, the very expensive and often difficult work that has to go in to digitizing it? I should say also that early versions of digitization of Jewish books place those digital versions under copyright. And whether that is legal or not, I know, like they used to say, like, you be the judge, right? Like, we've decided not to have that fight in court. We talk about it a lot, but we've decided not to test the waters there. But that means that even if a text exists digitally, it's not necessarily in a form that we can get. So it could, in theory, go that direction. Will it? I think it depends on how we deal with those challenges.
Oh, Matt, did you want to add to your question?
I just wanted to add really quickly a follow-up question and a comment. If you're concerned about copyright in the Dead Sea Scrolls, stay away from 4QMMT. It's a Scrolls joke. Anyways.
That was very inside baseball, Matt.
Very inside.
I guess my follow-up question then would be, and I completely understand, get everything you've said. I would love to see Ben Sira on Sefaria, but for a text that's very much a early Jewish literature, group of texts like First and Second Maccabees, these are texts that are not written in Hebrew. Josephus and Philo would be other ones.
We have those.
Oh, you do have those? And do you have the Greek that goes with them, or is it just translations?
No, I don't think so. Putting up other languages is its own issue, but we very much have Josephus, we have Philo, we have Maccabees, I believe.
Do you have Maccabees? Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. But it's only in translation though, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. really was not made with those speaking Greek in mind. Could it happen to
yeah.
everyone? It could, but yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Eli?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That was very interesting. This is completely outside my wheelhouse, so I apologize in advance. And I needed to coordinate a visiting speaker in my class, so once again, I apologize. This is a digital platform, and given the fact that the buzzword in the past few years is AI, is there a plan? Is there something you want to do, you can do to utilize to kind of to harness the power of and the potential thereof and so on and so forth to try? That's one. And secondly, yeah, so accessible, it exists somewhere on the internet, but how do you advocate for actually, for people to take advantage of this resource, especially people who are, there seems to be some kind of a fatigue of reading in a sense, right? People don't read, certainly students, I have this debate with my students or this disagreement with them. So these two elements, AI and how do you get people to engage with texts in a world that is being consumed by TikTok and other social media?
They're both really
Thank you.
rich questions. Thank you. In terms of AI, so I mentioned a little bit some of the work that we're doing with machine learning. There's a lot. There's a lot. Again, some of which is ongoing and really has existed. I mean, AI is sort of on a continuum with machine learning, right? What you call it partially depends on the conversation you want to have. So it's been part of Sefaria from the beginning, and obviously there have been incredible advancements in recent years. The ways that we link text, the ways that we find citations, those are all very much machine learning. AI is making tremendous strides in terms of helping us vocalize texts, which actually gets to a little bit of your question around, like, it's not really what you were asking, but sort of around accessibility, right? Like, how do we encourage people to read text? Well, step one is they need to be able to read them. And if you are, let's say, especially an American Jew who was taught to read Hebrew with vocalization, then those unvocalized texts are doing nothing for you. And that's something that we currently use an AI system checked by a human, and it sped us up like tremendously. Like we used to do a couple books in a year, and now we're doing multiple books each month. So those are like small things, but they're also big things. Translation is another area we're exploring. And to kind of combine the question about how do we help people into these texts and also the question about AI, Sefaria recently, maybe I'll share my screen again. Sefaria recently started thinking about topical search. Actually, that's not true. We started a while ago, but we recently started using AI to help us with topical search. And so the example that I'll give is somebody who wants to learn more about Shabbat or the Jewish Sabbath, which is a really core concept in Judaism. And also it is not like 100% easy to say how you would study it from within the Jewish canon. Because if you were to search for Shabbat on Sefaria, there is a book, you can see it on my screen, called Shabbat. It's the Talmudic tractate of Shabbat, which would actually be a terrible introduction to how to observe or how Jews think about, right? That would be like a really bad newcomer, as we call it, experience. It's a very dense text. It's got a lot going on. It's not well structured for an introductory class. You wouldn't use it in your 101 courses. And so we developed this hashtag Shabbat option, which takes you to the topics page. This one is actually, I believe, hand curated. We did maybe 100, 150 or so manually in order to train the AI. And then, oh, this is not what it looks like. Sorry, because I'm on the admin. Oh, no, maybe it is. Never mind. I'm not logged in. It's fine. This is the way it actually looks when you go to the site. These notable sources, we trained AI models to curate the sources and then also to write these little learning introductions that orient you to the source and orient you to something about the message and why it's on the page. And the gamble that we're making, to your question, Eli, is that this will help people get into text, that in a world where people don't read or don't engage so much, that this will be a pathway. And it's not necessarily a recipe for reading the entire text, but many of these canonical sources aren't things where you sit down to read the whole thing. It's more of a study experience than a reading experience. And so the hope is that you are interested in something like lighting candles to welcome Shabbat. And then you click to open the source. And then after you open the source, you'll be able to click on that and see more resources in the sidebar and kind of go from there. So that's the short answer to your question, which could have a lot of other answers, but those are some of the things we're experimenting with.
So I'm going to be a little greedy because time is running out. And I want to ask you about I'll ask a question from a historical and perhaps a sociological perspective. Sefaria demonstrates the ability that we all have now to look at literally hundreds, in fact, thousands of years worth of produced material. But you can also look at a shorter historical time period, say the last 70 years or 100 years, and the way that Jewish relationship to authority, participation, and access have changed over time. We talk about periods in the mid-20th century when Jewish communities were treated more as audiences. There's always been a history of Jewish people studying texts, but at different points in history, the authority of textual meaning has been more top-down, and there's been a lot of passivity off and on through the Jewish experience of textuality. Intellectually, kind of interpretively, what do you see as the deepest dynamics of power and authority that are available here? You mentioned people who look like you not necessarily having access. Talk to us a little bit about the experience that's available and if possible, the way that you see Sefaria transforming Jewish communal experience of knowledge.
That is a very big question, but I will do my best in a minute or two. I think it's a great question. Sefaria was literally founded to help people who did not feel that they had a place in the community of those who engage with these texts regularly, to help them find ways into the text. That's who our co-founders really are. And that was the mission from the beginning. And I don't think there's been any large scale study done. If any of you are in a position to do that and want to talk after, let me know. But anecdotally, and through our user surveys, we find that to be true, that people feel that there's a way that they can get inside these texts that they couldn't previously. We saw it, I think one way of kind of isolating that was the Daf Yomi experience, that there are communities of people who study one page a day of the Talmud every day for 7.5 years, thereby completing the Talmud. It's a really long book, and making it available digitally and in English, combined with other digital resources available, email lists that send out links to Sefaria, and podcasts and online classes, and also the previous Daf Yomi cycle restarted in 2020, in January of 2020. COVID hit a few months later, and so even people who could access the books physically often needed not to do that. And so I think that's an area where it's made a huge difference. And I routinely meet people, and we get emails, and we see on our user surveys people who say, I would not have had access to these texts were it not for Sefaria. And I think that is really true. And I know some people are very worried about the power dynamic there. I'm really not. I think that this gives more power to Torah. It gives more power to these canonical texts, the fact that they are spread really widely. And I always feel like it's a kind of lack of faith in a way on the part of those who feel like that there's a danger in spreading this Torah. I feel that these words are strong enough and these texts are strong enough to withstand lots of study and lots of scrutiny and lots of people being part of the conversation. And so I think that's sort of Sefaria's stance towards the question of power. I think unquestionably it has opened things up. And I think, as I said earlier, that there's also a hope here that we can teach people about what are these texts, why are they interesting, why are they important, who wrote them, when did they write them, right? All those pieces of metadata that we can layer more and more onto there, so that we're not just giving people the chance to like randomly quote things off the internet, but really acculturating people to what these texts are and what their power is.
What a wonderful response to a fairly impossible question. I want to thank everyone who is here today. I want to thank you for your questions. Sarah, I can't thank you enough for a really, really interesting and rich presentation. I think there is a lot to say about contemporary and future Jewish history and textuality here. You've raised important observations around power, authority, and engagement. And you've also just helped us to see how much more there is to see. Thank you so very much. And thank you everyone for being part of this presentation. I look forward to seeing you all soon at another event or in person. And again, a quick round of applause for our wonderful speaker.
Thank you all, and feel free to be in touch if you have more questions. I know our time is short, so thank you all so much.
Be well. I hope to talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.